While playing games, my friend took a call, whispering, "Love you, baby." Later, I checked. It was my fiancée. I never expected my world to collapse over a video game night. It was supposed to be one of those casual evenings where nothing really matters. Pizza boxes stacked on the table, soda cans scattered, controllers buzzing in our hands. Brandon and I had done this 100 times before. We'd grown up side by side, always knowing where to find each other, whether it was on the basketball court after school or at his basement couch, where we lost countless hours to whatever game we were obsessed with at the time. He wasn't just a friend. He was the closest thing I had to a brother. That night, though, I noticed something strange. In the middle of our match, Brandon's headset mic went quiet. I could see his lips moving, but it wasn't directed at me or the game. He leaned back, shielded his mouth with his hand, and his voice dropped low. I didn't catch everything, but one phrase cut through the noise of the game. "Love you, baby." I froze for a second. My brain stuttered, almost refusing to process it. Brandon didn't have a girlfriend. I knew that for a fact. He wasn't dating anyone, hadn't been on any recent dates as far as I knew, and we told each other everything. That's the kind of friendship we had. Or at least, that's what I thought. The words echoed in my head, even as I tried to keep playing. My character got knocked out on screen, and Brandon laughed like nothing happened. When he noticed me staring, he brushed it off, saying he was just talking to his cousin about something private. He gave such a quick, casual explanation that I almost felt guilty for doubting him. Almost. But the unease didn't leave. It crawled under my skin and settled there. Something about the way he avoided my eyes told me he wasn't being honest. Still, I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was being paranoid. Hours passed, and eventually the night started to wind down. My phone battery had died earlier, and I needed to call my mom to check in about an errand I was supposed to run for her the next morning. Without thinking much of it, I reached over and grabbed Brandon's phone from the coffee table. He was in the bathroom at the time, and I figured he wouldn't mind. We'd borrowed each other's stuff countless times. I tapped the screen awake, and the call log popped up instantly. My chest tightened before my brain even registered the names. At the very top of the screen, under recent calls, was a name I knew better than anyone else's. Lydia. My fiancée. My fiancée's name, sitting there on Brandon's phone, timestamped less than an hour ago. The room seemed to tilt. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like someone had poured ice water into my veins. The whisper, the dodged answer, all of it snapped into place in an instant. I didn't need more proof. I didn't need to second-guess what I saw. It wasn't some coincidence. It wasn't some misunderstanding. My best friend had just told my fiancée, "Love you, baby." Brandon walked back in, drying his hands on his shirt, completely unaware that the world had shifted in the seconds he was gone. I put the phone down on the table, face up so he could see the screen. The moment his eyes flicked to it, his entire body language changed. His smile faltered, his shoulders tensed, and for the first time in my life, I saw him afraid of me. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. My silence said more than words could. I just stared at him, waiting. He started with denial. Said it was nothing, that I was misreading it. When that didn't work, he stumbled into excuses, that Lydia had called him by mistake, that it wasn't what it looked like. His voice cracked as he spoke, and every word dug the knife deeper. Finally, when he realized I wasn't moving, wasn't giving him any ground, his excuses crumbled. He admitted it. Not cleanly, not fully, but enough. He said it hadn't been planned, that it just happened. He said they never meant for me to find out. Every muscle in my body screamed to hit him, to end it right there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not because I didn't want to, but because the betrayal was so overwhelming that even rage couldn't push through it. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of realizing that the two people I trusted most in the world had gutted me without hesitation. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and walked out of his apartment. My ears rang as I slammed the door behind me. The night air hit me like a slap, but it didn't cool the fire inside. On the drive home, my phone buzzed nonstop. Lydia's name lit up the screen over and over, her picture flashing like a taunt. I didn't answer. I knew what she wanted to say. She'd want to explain, to twist it, to minimize it until somehow I became the unreasonable one. That was her style when backed into a corner. But I didn't need explanations. I'd already seen enough. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial. It was absolute. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for nearly an hour, staring at the empty street, trying to make sense of how everything had collapsed in one night. The future I thought I had, the wedding we'd been planning, the life we'd been sketching out, all of it was tainted now. Brandon wasn't just a friend. He'd been the best man I intended to stand beside me on the most important day of my life. Lydia wasn't just a partner. She was the woman I thought I'd grow old with. Both of them had been lying to me, and worse, they'd been lying together. I finally went inside, tossed my phone on the counter, and ignored the buzzing until it died again. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, while the weight of betrayal pressed down on me like a boulder. That night, something inside me shifted. The part of me that trusted people so easily, the part that thought loyalty was unbreakable, it died quietly in the dark. And all that was left was the cold, steady certainty that there would be no forgiveness. I woke up the next morning with the kind of heaviness in my chest that made it feel like I hadn't slept at all. My body was drained, but my mind had been racing for hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brandon's face, caught in that moment when he realized I knew. And every time I pushed that away, Lydia's face replaced it, smiling at me during our engagement party, talking about our future kids, asking me if we should book the bigger wedding venue because maybe more people would want to come. All of it felt like a stage performance now. By the time the sun pushed through the blinds, my phone had charged just enough to turn back on. The screen lit up with a wall of missed calls and voicemails, all from Lydia. I didn't want to listen to any of them, but curiosity got the better of me. I played the first voicemail on speaker as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cold cup of coffee I hadn't touched. Her voice was shaky, rushed. She kept saying we needed to talk, that things weren't what they seemed, that she loved me and wouldn't throw away what we had over one stupid mistake. She sounded desperate. The problem was, I'd heard desperation from people who'd been caught before, and I knew the difference between regret and damage control. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry I'd found out. I decided I wasn't going to let this drag on. If she wanted to talk, then we would talk. But it would be on my terms, not hers. I called her back, told her to come over. She agreed immediately, like she'd been waiting by the phone. When Lydia showed up, she tried to hug me the second I opened the door. I stepped aside instead. She froze for a moment, then walked past me into the living room. She looked perfect, of course, hair done, makeup just enough to hide that she'd probably cried half the night. She was dressed like she wanted to project control, but her eyes darted around nervously, as if she could sense the walls closing in. She started talking before I even sat down. She admitted she'd crossed a line with Brandon, but insisted it hadn't been serious. She framed it like it was some emotional confusion, that I'd been working too much, away too often on business trips, and she'd felt lonely. She said Brandon had been there. They'd leaned on each other, and one thing had led to another. She called it a mistake, over and over, like the word could erase the weight of it. I listened without interrupting, but inside I was boiling. Not just because she'd betrayed me, but because she thought I was stupid enough to believe this was some slip-up. Brandon hadn't just called her to chat. He whispered, "Love you, baby." That wasn't a mistake. That was routine. That was habit. When I finally spoke, I told her I'd seen the call log. I told her Brandon had admitted enough for me to know the truth. That's when her tone shifted. She stopped crying, stopped begging. Instead, she got sharp. She accused me of being cold, of neglecting her, of creating the distance that had pushed her into Brandon's arms. She acted like I was the one who'd caused this. The sheer audacity of it nearly made me laugh. But I stayed calm. I told her I wasn't interested in playing blame games. I just wanted her to be honest. That's when she slipped. She mentioned something about how Brandon had been there when her parents were pressuring her about the wedding fund. My ears pricked up instantly. I asked her what she meant. She froze for a fraction of a second, then tried to brush it off. But it was too late. I dug deeper. And piece by piece, it came out. Her family had been worried about the cost of the wedding. I already knew that. They'd hinted at it a few times. What I didn't know was that part of the money they had set aside, money that was supposed to cover venue deposits, catering, and all the rest, had been redirected. Not into the wedding, but into Brandon's so-called startup project. I sat there in disbelief as she stumbled through the explanation. Apparently, Brandon had pitched some app idea to her father. Lydia had vouched for him, said he was trustworthy, said I'd be supportive if I knew. Her father had invested a chunk of the wedding fund, expecting returns before the big day. Lydia had been in on it the whole time, and they never told me. Suddenly, the pieces fit together in a way that made my stomach churn. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't just two people sneaking behind my back. They'd tied themselves together financially, using money that was supposed to build our future. And they'd done it while smiling in my face, letting me plan a wedding like some fool, while they were already connected in ways I couldn't see. I realized then that Lydia wasn't just lying to cover up an affair. She was lying to protect a bigger secret, that she and Brandon had been aligning themselves against me long before I found out. I told her flatly that I was done. She begged, threatened, tried every angle, that we could fix it, that I shouldn't throw everything away, that people would talk, that I'd look like the one who abandoned her. Her words washed over me without sticking. Finally, when she realized I wasn't bending, she lashed out one last time. She said maybe marrying me had been a mistake anyway. Maybe Brandon understood her better. Maybe I wasn't the man she thought I was. That was the last thing she said before I opened the door and told her to leave. She stormed out, slamming it hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. When the silence settled, I sat back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Betrayal from a fiancé was bad enough. Betrayal from a best friend cut even deeper. But betrayal from both of them at the same time, tangled together with lies and stolen money? That was something else entirely. I thought about my next move. I could expose them both immediately, call her family, tell everyone what they'd done. But some part of me wanted to play this carefully. If they thought they were in control, maybe I could turn it around on them. That's when I decided I wouldn't just walk away. I'd make sure the truth came out in a way they couldn't twist, couldn't escape, and couldn't recover from. I started by pulling out old receipts and messages, anything that connected Lydia, her family's money, and Brandon. The pattern was clearer than I'd expected. Transfers, meetings, excuses about where she'd been when she said she was busy with wedding planning. She'd been busy, all right, just not with me. By the end of the night, I had a folder on my desk full of proof. Proof of their affair. Proof of their financial scheming. Proof that the people who claimed to love me had built their own future on the foundation of my trust. And the more I looked at it, the colder I felt. Not just anger, but resolve. Because if Lydia and Brandon thought they could play me, they hadn't seen anything yet. By the time another week passed, I had stopped shaking every time Lydia's name popped up on my phone. I hadn't answered a single one of her calls since the day she stormed out, but she kept trying. Brandon, too. The calls started off frequent, then slowed down once they realized I wasn't going to play their game. That silence worked in my favor. They thought maybe I was brooding, maybe licking my wounds. They didn't realize I was planning. The evidence folder on my desk grew thicker each day. Bank statements showed Lydia's family's transfer into Brandon's startup account. Screenshots of call logs tied them together during times they'd both lied to me. I even managed to get a message from a mutual acquaintance who admitted overhearing them in a bar, laughing about how Caleb would never catch on. Every new piece didn't make me feel better. It just hardened me further. I could have gone straight to Lydia's parents or blown it all up online. But neither option felt right. This wasn't about venting. It wasn't about just telling the truth. I wanted them both to feel the kind of exposure I had felt when I saw her name on Brandon's phone. No chance to spin, no room to wriggle. So I came up with the idea of the dinner. I sent out a group message to a handful of our closest friends, people who had been expecting to stand beside me at the wedding. I told them I wanted to get everyone together, that things had gotten complicated, and it was time to clear the air. I knew word would get to Lydia and Brandon whether I invited them directly or not, but I made sure to include them both. If either tried to decline, it would look suspicious. To my surprise, they both agreed quickly. That told me they were nervous. Nervous people walk into traps faster than calm ones. The night of the dinner, I booked a long table at a restaurant downtown. Neutral ground. Enough privacy that people could talk, but public enough that there would be no screaming match without an audience. I arrived early, deliberately taking the seat at the center of the table where I could see everyone. The first to arrive were two of my oldest friends from high school. They asked what this was really about, but I just told them to wait. Then came Lydia, dressed sharp, smiling like nothing had ever happened. She sat across from me without a word. Brandon slid in beside her not long after. The rest of the seats filled quickly. The room hummed with small talk until the food arrived. That was when I started. I didn't give a speech. I just asked Lydia how the wedding planning was going. She blinked at me like she wasn't sure if I was serious. She muttered something about vendors and flower arrangements. Then I asked Brandon how his business was doing. His eyes darted toward her before he answered. He said it was still in the early stages, but promising. The table quieted. Everyone sensed the undercurrent. I leaned back and let the silence stretch. Then I pulled the folder out of my bag and dropped it onto the table. Every head turned. I opened it slowly, flipping through until I landed on the bank statements. I slid them across the table toward one of our friends, who frowned as he read. Then I handed another page to someone else. Piece by piece, the evidence began circulating. I told them Lydia's family hadn't just been funding wedding costs. They'd redirected money to Brandon, funneling it into his startup, while both of them let me believe everything was normal. I told them about the phone call I overheard, the call log, the lies about late nights. My voice was calm, steady, deliberate. Lydia tried to interject, saying I was twisting things. Brandon backed her up, claiming it wasn't like that. But it was too late. I had dates, times, amounts, names. I laid them out one after another like cards in a winning hand. The more I spoke, the more their facade cracked. Lydia's voice grew sharp, almost panicked. Brandon's face flushed red, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he wanted to bolt. They weren't used to losing control of the story. One of our mutual friends finally cut in, asking directly if they had been sleeping together. The question hit like a hammer. Lydia stammered. Brandon shifted uncomfortably, and in their silence, the truth was obvious. Then came the first twist I hadn't expected. Another friend, Sean, spoke up. He said he'd kept quiet because he didn't want to get involved, but since everything was on the table, he couldn't hold it anymore. He had been at a party 3 months back where Lydia and Brandon showed up together. They hadn't been subtle. They left together that night, laughing, holding hands. He'd brushed it off as nothing serious, but now he admitted he had known. The entire table erupted. Voices overlapped. Some cursed at Brandon, others shook their heads at Lydia. Neither of them had anywhere to hide. Lydia finally snapped. She stood up, pointing at me, saying I was humiliating her on purpose, that I could have kept this private. She accused me of destroying everything just to make her look bad. Brandon stood too, muttering about how I was ruining his reputation. I didn't flinch. I told them they had already destroyed everything themselves. All I did was show the truth. They stormed out, leaving the table in stunned silence. I sat there, finishing my drink, while everyone else processed what they had just witnessed. Some patted me on the back, others apologized for not seeing it sooner. I just sat quietly, because I wasn't looking for sympathy. I hadn't set this up for pity. I had set it up to strip away every mask they wore. By the time the night ended, word had already started spreading. People texted friends, screenshots of the bank statements circulated in group chats. The betrayal wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever trusted Lydia and Brandon. When I got home that night, my phone lit up with messages from numbers I didn't even recognize. Some were from Lydia's relatives, furious and demanding to know if it was true. Others were from acquaintances, saying they couldn't believe it, but the proof was undeniable. Brandon texted me once, a long paragraph about how I'd gone too far. I deleted it without reading to the end. The trap had worked better than I expected. I hadn't just exposed them. I had detonated their reputations in front of the very people they had counted on for support. And as I sat back, staring at the quiet of my apartment, I realized there was no going back. The fallout had only just begun. The morning after the dinner, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. By then, the story had spread through nearly every corner of our circle. Screenshots of the bank transfers and notes from the confrontation were flying around group chats. People who hadn't seen me in months suddenly wanted to check in. Some were just fishing for details, others genuinely concerned. I ignored most of them. The only calls I answered came from Lydia's parents. Her mother's voice shook with disbelief as she asked if what I'd said was true. I didn't sugarcoat it. I explained everything. The calls, the financial transfers, the affair. I told her I had the paperwork to prove it. She didn't argue. She didn't try to defend Lydia. Instead, she sighed, thanked me for telling her directly, and hung up. Minutes later, her father called. His tone was sharper, colder. He demanded copies of the statements. I sent them without hesitation. By noon, Lydia's number appeared again on my screen, but this time I answered. She was frantic. She said I had ruined her, that her parents had cut her off financially, that they were ashamed of her. She accused me of overreacting, of blowing things out of proportion. I listened silently until she stopped yelling, then told her she had made her choices. That silence on my end seemed to enrage her even more. She cursed, said I would regret this, then hung up. It was the last time we spoke. Meanwhile, Brandon's situation unraveled just as quickly. His startup had been a fragile idea held together with borrowed money and promises. Once Lydia's parents pulled their investment, the structure collapsed overnight. He tried to scramble for other funding, but by then the truth had spread too far. Nobody wanted to risk their money with someone who had just been exposed as both a cheat and a liar. His business was dead before it ever really started. I didn't celebrate. Watching them both fall apart didn't bring satisfaction. What it brought was a strange calm. They had spent months weaving lies, and I had ripped those lies apart in one night. There was nothing left for them to spin. For weeks afterward, I focused on myself. I cut ties with anyone who had sided with them, poured my time into work, and started rebuilding my routine. The first few nights alone were rough, but slowly the weight began to lift. For the first time in months, I wasn't second-guessing every word, every schedule change, every excuse. But just when I thought the story had ended, another twist came. It was Sean who delivered it. The same friend who had admitted at the dinner that he'd seen Lydia and Brandon together months before. He asked to meet up privately, said there was something else I needed to know. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. He looked uneasy, almost guilty. When I pressed him, he finally confessed. Lydia hadn't just cheated with Brandon. Months before that, she had been involved with someone else entirely. A co-worker she had met during a short-term contract job. Sean hadn't wanted to tell me earlier because he hadn't had proof, only rumors. But after the dinner, one of his colleagues who knew the co-worker had confirmed it. At first, I thought it was just more salt in an already open wound. But then I thought back. The nights Lydia had claimed she was working late, the excuses that never quite lined up. It fit too well. That realization cut deeper than I expected. Brandon hadn't been the beginning of her betrayal. He had just been the latest chapter. Lydia had been living a double life long before I caught her. The wedding, the promises, the future we had sketched together, none of it had ever been real to her. Oddly, that knowledge didn't crush me. It freed me, because it proved beyond doubt that nothing I could have done differently would have saved us. This wasn't about me being away for work or me missing a signal. This was who she was, and she would have done it no matter what. I thanked Sean for telling me, then walked out into the cold evening air with a strange sense of clarity. The anger was gone. So was the sadness. All that remained was certainty. In the months that followed, life moved forward. Lydia tried to salvage her reputation, but people weren't quick to forget. Every new guy she dated seemed to learn about her history before things got serious. Her family kept her at arm's length, no longer willing to pour money into her future. She found work, but without their backing, it was nothing compared to the life she had imagined. Brandon fared no better. His startup debt piled up, and with no investors left, he was forced to shut it down. Most of our old friends cut contact with him. When I saw him once at a grocery store months later, he couldn't even meet my eyes. He walked out without buying anything. As for me, I rebuilt quietly. I didn't jump into another relationship. I didn't broadcast my side of the story. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken for itself. Every betrayal has an aftershock. Mine came in waves, but each wave left me stronger than before. By the time the dust settled, Lydia and Brandon were little more than shadows in my past. Reminders of how blind trust can be twisted, and how exposing the truth can change everything. I didn't forgive them. I didn't forget. But I also didn't let them define me anymore. Because in the end, they had lost far more than I ever did. And that was the only closure I needed. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day. And trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.